The Indian government requires a staggering administrative apparatus to function. Millions of civil servants, specialized ministries, and vast departments all operate simultaneously, demanding a central commanding force to keep the nation running. Yet, if you search the foundation of this entire system, the Constitution of India, you will find a strange paradox. Out of hundreds of articles detailing the rules of the Republic, the Prime Minister is mentioned in exactly 4 of them. The framers adopted the British parliamentary model, choosing to draft broad, sketchy outlines for the executive branch, rather than detailed operational manuals. Under Article 77, the President is the formal, de jure head of state. By strict legal definition, every single executive action of the Government of India is taken exclusively in the President's name. The political reality tells a very different story. The Prime Minister operates as the de facto executive, the true head of the government wielding the actual power. To understand Indian polity, we have to look past the sparse constitutional text. We need to examine how parliamentary conventions, judicial rulings, and extra-constitutional bodies legally engineer the supreme power of the Prime Minister. Article 75 provides a very simple starting point. It states that the Prime Minister shall be appointed by the President. This does not mean the President has a free choice. Under strict parliamentary convention, the President is required to appoint the leader of the majority party in the Lok Sabha. The President only exercises personal discretion in rare, highly specific scenarios, such as a hung parliament where no single party holds a clear majority, or the sudden death of an incumbent without an obvious successor. Interestingly, the person appointed doesn't even need to be a member of the lower house. The Prime Minister can be drawn from either house of parliament. Indira Gandhi, for example, was a member of the Rajya Sabha, the upper house, when she assumed the office in 1966. Manmohan Singh was also a Rajya Sabha member throughout his entire tenure, which began in 2004. And in 1996, H.D. Deve Gowda was appointed Prime Minister first and given a month to prove his majority in the House afterward. The true mechanism of executive power is defined by Article 74. It establishes a council of ministers, with the Prime Minister at the head, to aid and advise the President. While the phrase aid and advise sounds suggestive, the 42nd and 44th constitutional amendments locked into place a very different reality. They explicitly made the Prime Minister's advice legally binding on the President. The Supreme Court solidified this interpretation in 1971 and 1974. The court ruled that whenever the Constitution requires the satisfaction of the President, it legally means the satisfaction of the Council of Ministers. While the President legally holds the pen to sign orders into law, the Constitution and the judiciary ensure that the Prime Minister dictates the words. To execute those orders, the Prime Minister relies on a vast structure. This is the Council of Ministers, the broad executive base required by Article 74. To prevent governments from creating endless ministerial posts to buy political loyalty, the 91st Amendment Act of 2003 capped this council. The total number of ministers cannot exceed 15% of the Lok Sabha's total strength. At the apex of this structure sit the cabinet ministers. They hold the highest authority and control the most critical portfolios: defense, finance, and home affairs. Below them are the ministers of state. They can hold independent charge of smaller ministries or be directly attached to a cabinet minister. The third tier consists of deputy ministers, tasked primarily with providing administrative and political assistance to the senior ranks. At the base are parliamentary secretaries. They have no actual departmental control, serving entirely to assist senior ministers with their legislative duties. The Prime Minister exercises absolute control over this entire hierarchy. They allocate every portfolio, reshuffle ranks, and can force the resignation of any member at any time. The Council of Ministers is a massive administrative structure, but it exists entirely at the architectural mercy of one person. The stability of this massive executive branch relies on 2 opposing vectors of legal accountability. The first is collective responsibility. Under Article 75, Clause 3, the entire Council of Ministers is jointly responsible to the Lok Sabha. They operate under a strict rule. They sink or swim together. If the lower house passes a vote of no confidence, every single minister must resign immediately. The second vector is individual responsibility. Article 75, Clause 2 states that individual ministers hold office during the pleasure of the President. But because the president only acts on binding advice, the president can only remove a minister when directly instructed to do so by the prime minister. The prime minister weaponizes this role to maintain strict ideological cohesion. Anyone who disagrees with a cabinet decision can be instantly dismissed without threatening the survival of the broader government. Accountability to the legislature is a collective burden, but accountability to the executive is fiercely individual and entirely controlled by the prime minister. If we move beyond the formal constitution and look at the practical reality, decision-making power is concentrated even further inward. Within the broader council, the cabinet acts as the supreme executive authority and the chief policy formulating body. To ease the cabinet's heavy burden, labor is divided into cabinet committees, allowing for in-depth analysis on complex issues like economic affairs or national security. You won't find these committees in the Constitution. They are extra-constitutional bodies, established entirely by the Prime Minister under the Transaction of Business Rules of 1961. The Prime Minister also utilizes groups of ministers, ad hoc bodies formed rapidly to navigate specific emergent crises, and then disbanded once a solution is crystallized. But the true center of power lies at the very core. It rests in what is known as the kitchen cabinet, or the inner cabinet. This is a completely informal, extra-constitutional group of 2 to 4 highly trusted colleagues, sometimes even including family members. They formulate the most critical decisions before the formal cabinet even meets to review them. Legal power flows downward from the Constitution, but practical power radiates outward from the Prime Minister's closest, unwritten circle. Viewing the Indian political system as a complex machine, you see how heavily it relies on a central force to keep the gears turning. The Union executive presents itself as a broad parliamentary democracy, yet it functions as an intensely centralized administrative apparatus. This concentration of power bypasses the sparse text of the Constitution, leaning entirely on unwritten conventions, internal business rules, and strict party discipline. Article 78 secures this dynamic by designating the Prime Minister as the ultimate duty-bound channel of communication between this massive state machinery and the President. The Indian parliamentary system is legally bound to the President, but practically, structurally, and functionally, it is engineered exclusively for the Prime Minister.